Fast forward. Years ago, when I was 21, I worked the night shift at a small 24-hour convenience store at the outskirts of town. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and I actually enjoyed the quiet hours of the job. Just me, the hums of refrigerators, and occasional late-night customers. At the time, the store had a strict policy: no loitering after 2 a.m. due to an uptick in petty theft and vandalism in the area. Every night it was just me and my coworker, an older guy named Mike, who mostly kept to himself. On rare occasion, the manager would drop by to check on things, but most of the time we were on our own. The job was fine until one particular night, and this was towards the end of my contract. I have always struggled figuring out my instinct, but that night before leaving my house for work, I had this feeling that something wasn't right. I started my shift at 10 p.m. The night was slow, and quite just a handful of customers moving in and out. By 1 a.m., the place was dead quiet. That's when the phone rang. A woman's voice, sharp and impatient. She asked if we carried a specific brand of cigarettes. I told her we didn't have. She let out a frustrated sigh of anger, muttering something under her breath before abruptly hanging up the phone. Strange, right? But nothing too unusual. About 15 minutes later, an old sedan pulled into the parking lot. 3 people came out of it. 2 men and a woman, all in their late 40s or early 50s. As soon as the woman stepped inside, I recognized her from the called. She didn't acknowledge me at first, just browsing the aisle with her 2 companions. Something about them felt off. They weren't talking, not really looking at the items, just lingering and watching. Then, as if flipping over a switch, the woman suddenly then became over-friendly. She walked down the counter and then asked if I knew any good auto shop in the area. That's when I noticed the clipboard in her hand, a thick stack of papers, and a black pen resting on top. I gave her a half-hearted answer, pointing her towards a shop a few blocks down, but my gut told me she wasn't really interested in car repair store. The whole interaction felt so uncomfortable. While the conversation was going on, her 2 companions had positioned themselves strategically. One near the door, the other by the refrigerated drinks in the back. It wasn't until when I turned to check the security monitor that I realized what was happening. The guy by the drinks wasn't looking at the beverages. He was watching Mike, who was at the back room handling inventory, while the other guy by the door, he had gently flipped the door lock. My heart spiked. I had no idea what their plan was, but I didn't want to find out. Casually, I reached under the counter and pressed the silent alarm. The woman must have sensed my shift in demeanor, because she suddenly placed her clipboard on the counter and smiled. "Actually," she said, "we might need some direction." I force a smile, play along while my eyes flicker on the security cameras. I could see the flashing light indicating that the alarm has been received. Mike stepped out from the back, and immediately, the energy in the room changed. The man near the drinks tense. The one by the door shifted uneasily. Then, as if nothing has happened, the woman grabbed her clipboard and nodded. "Thanks for your help." They left. Quickly after they left, I stood frozen behind the counter, my pulse still racing. Mike gave me a long look before stepping up beside me with his arms crossed. "You pressed the alarm?" "Didn't you?" he asked. I nodded. He let out a whistle. "Good called." The police arrive about 10 minutes later, lights splashing but siren off. 2 officers stepped inside, their expression calm but very serious. I recounted everything, the phone call, the way they positioned themselves, the clipboard, the locker door. The young officer, a guy who looked barely older than me, took notes while the other, a woman with graying hair and a sharp gaze, listened carefully. "They didn't try to take anything?" she asked. "No," I said. "But I felt like they were waiting for something, or testing something." The officers exchange a look. "Your store has been flagged a few times for suspicious activities," the woman finally said. "Nothing major, but there's been report of business cases like this, mostly within late hours like this. Minimal staff, which make it an easy target." A chill ran through me. Mike scoffed, shaking his head. The officer checked the security footage, but as expected, the trio hadn't done anything outright illegal. The act was just enough reason to set up alarm bells in my head. Before they left, the younger officer handed me a card. "Call us if you see anything." I took it with shaky hands. For the rest of my shift, every sound, every car pulling into the lot, every creak in the building got me at the edge. Even Mike, who is usually indifferent about everything, kept glancing at the windows. By the time the morning shift arrived, I was more than ready to leave. As I stepped outside, I glanced around the parking lot. There was no sign of the sedan or the trio. Even as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking that the situation wasn't over yet, and I was right. 2 nights later, my shift started as normal. My mind could not rest. I kept thinking of what has happened the 2 nights before. I told myself maybe I was just overreacting, that maybe they were just weird customer and nothing more, but I couldn't ignore the feeling of unease in my stomach. Mike had taken the night off, which means I was left alone. Just me, the flickering overhead light, and the occasional hum of the fridge compressor kicking on. By 1 a.m., the store was empty. I had just started restocking the cigarette shelf behind the counter when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching over gravel in the parking lot. I turned to look at the security cameras. My blood ran cold. I didn't even have time to process the whole situation. The old sedan again? Out of a sudden, the door opened of the store. The woman from the night before walked in first with the same clipboard in her hand. The 2 men follow, positioning themselves just like last time. One near the back cooler and the other at the entrance. The door didn't chime. I realized that the electronic sound produced by the door during closing has been cut off. "Good evening," the woman greeted, her voice overly friendly. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to be polite. "Can I help you?" She smiled, stepping forward. "Actually, you can." She placed the clipboard on the counter and slid it towards me. "We are doing a survey on local businesses. Just a few questions." My hands stayed glued to the counter. The air felt different this time. Heavier. I glanced at the security camera. The man near the entrance was standing too close to the door handle, blocking it, while the other was still at the coolers. But he wasn't looking at the drinks, but he was watching me through the reflection of the glass. The woman tapped the clipboard. "It won't take long," said the woman in a calm voice. I forced myself to be calm. Then I spotted something that sent a chill down my spine. The security camera wasn't blinking. It has been on earlier. I was sure of it. Somehow they had cut the feed. I needed to get out immediately, keeping my expression neutral. I reached under the counter, pretending to grab a pen. Instead, I wrapped my fingers around the emergency panic button and pressed. Nothing happened. The siren alarm wasn't working. I felt my stomach drop. The woman's smile filtered slightly, like she could tell I had figured it out. That's when she said something that made my blood turn into ice. "No one is coming to help you this time." She said it casually, like it was a fact, still holding the clipboard. My breath caught in my throat. The man at the door shifted slightly, his hands hovering at the door, the lock. The other one had moved closer, no longer pretending to browse. I knew if I froze, it wouldn't end well. I forced a nervous laugh, acting as if I didn't notice anything. "Sorry," I said, tapping the counter. "My manager handles everything. I can't sign anything." The woman tilted her head, studying me. "Maybe just a few questions will do," said the woman. My mind was racing. My phone was in the back room. The landline was under the counter, but I will have to turn my back to grab it, and I couldn't risk it. Then I remembered something. Earlier that night, I had opened the back door slightly that night to let in fresh air. The store had an automatic locking system. If the door shut completely, it will require a key to reopen it from the other side. I had no chance. I let out an exaggerated sigh. "You know what? My manager might still be here in the back." I mentioned, "Let me check." The woman's expression didn't change, but I could tell she didn't like the answer. She opened her mouth to speak to stop me, but I didn't wait. I turned and walked quickly towards the back, forcing myself to run. Every nerve in my body was screaming. As soon as I walked past the stockroom, I bolted the door. I shoved through the back exit just as I heard hurried footsteps behind me. The next second I was outside. I threw my full weight against the door, slamming it shut. I heard the door lock click as if something heavy had hit the other side. I took off running. my lungs burning and my heart hammering in my chest, but I didn't stop. I kept running. There was a gas station a few blocks ahead of me. As I kept running, I didn't stop until I was inside the gas station, collapsing against the counter, gasping for breath. The cashier and some guy in his 50s stare at me as if I was insane. "Are you okay?" I shook my head, frantically pointing towards the store. "Call the cops." When the police arrived, the sedan was gone. They searched the store, checked the cameras. The footage has been wiped clean. The security system had been tampered with. Whoever they were, they had planned this. The police took my statement and waited till the morning. When the manager arrived, I quitted the job. For weeks, I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified I will see that old sedan again, but I never did. To this day, I don't know what they wanted. I am just grateful that I wasn't hurt physically, but the trauma lived with me forever. Till this day, when I'm faced with a similar situation which might not be of that type, that weird feeling just comes to my mind.